Richard's life with Anna had always seemed perfect. They had everything: love, trust, and the kind of marriage people envied. Together for 12 years, they were the couple everyone looked up to. But then things began to change. Anna, once so present, started slipping away. Late nights, secrets, and odd behavior that made Richard question everything. He never imagined it would be her, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, who would betray him in the worst way possible. But one message on her phone would shatter his world, and he knew everything was about to unravel. Richard and Anna's relationship had always been simple but fulfilling. They weren't extravagant or flashy. They were just real. Over 12 years, they built a life filled with shared memories: quiet mornings over coffee, cozy weekends spent hiking in the hills, and late-night conversations that went deep into the early hours. Richard loved the way Anna could turn the smallest details into something beautiful, her eyes lighting up as she described a sunset or a flower in bloom. There was a deep connection between them, something unspoken but understood. They had never doubted each other, and their friends often remarked on how perfect they were together. It felt like their bond was unbreakable. They were a team. Nothing could come between them, or so Richard thought. The trust they shared was something he believed would last forever. Yet as time went on, he began to feel an unsettling change in the air. But how could he possibly suspect Anna, the woman who had stood by him through everything? Their life had been so full of love and laughter. How could it be anything but perfect? It started so subtly that Richard almost brushed it off. Anna began coming home late more often, her excuses never quite matching up. A meeting ran long, or she was just caught up with work. But there was something in the way she said it that didn't sit right with him. At first, Richard chalked it up to stress at work, the pressures of her busy schedule as a marketing consultant. But then came the small changes. She checked her phone more often, hiding it quickly when he entered the room. She seemed distracted during dinner, her eyes flickering to her phone even when they were supposed to be sharing a meal. The warm, open Anna he'd always known was slowly becoming more distant, more secretive. The late-night texts she received, the long hours spent at the office. Richard didn't know what to think. At first, he questioned if he was just being paranoid, reading too much into her actions. After all, she had a career. But in his gut, he felt something was wrong. Her behavior no longer matched the woman he married. Something was off, and Richard couldn't shake the feeling that the trust they'd always shared was starting to fray at the edges. Was he imagining things, or was this the first sign of something darker? It was the phone. That one moment when Richard saw the name, Jake, on Anna's phone, that set the gears of suspicion into motion. It was just a name, nothing more. But it was the message that came with it. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." The words were innocent enough at first glance, but the tone was off. Richard had never heard Anna talk like that before. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach as he stared at the screen. Who was Jake? Why hadn't Anna ever mentioned him? He tried to ignore the wave of dread creeping up inside him, telling himself it was probably just a friend. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. The message lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. And the more he tried to convince himself it meant nothing, the more he couldn't escape the feeling that something was deeply wrong. His trust in Anna had always been unwavering, but now, every glance at her phone, every vague answer she gave, felt like a clue leading to something he wasn't prepared to face. That was the moment everything shifted for Richard. Richard's heart sank the night he overheard Anna on the phone with Jake. He had just come home early, and the moment he entered their bedroom, he heard Anna's soft voice, a tone of warmth and familiarity he'd never heard directed at him. She spoke to Jake as if they shared a private language, laughing at things only they understood. Her voice had a flirtatious edge that made Richard's stomach twist. He couldn't make out every word, but the tone was unmistakable. He felt his chest tighten with a cold realization. This wasn't just a friendship. This wasn't innocent. It was betrayal. The conversation, so full of affection, was everything their relationship had never been in the last few months. The realization hit him like a blow. This wasn't just a bad phase in their marriage. It was the beginning of the end. For the first time, Richard couldn't ignore the truth. His wife was having an affair, and he knew it. The decision to confront her, He couldn't put it off any longer. But he needed proof. He needed something undeniable to face her with. And now, with his heart shattering, Richard made a decision. He would find the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next few days were a blur of heartache and disbelief. Richard spent hours going through Anna's phone, digging deeper into her messages, hoping for an explanation that would make everything better, but finding only more proof of her betrayal. The messages between Anna and Jake were intimate and passionate. "Can't wait to be with you again," one read. "I'm counting the days until I can feel your arms around me." Richard's hands trembled as he scrolled, each word cutting deeper into his soul. These weren't just flirtations. They were confessions of love, promises of secrecy. He couldn't believe what he was reading. His mind raced, the pain almost unbearable. The woman he had loved for years, the woman he trusted implicitly, had betrayed him in the most intimate way. He wanted to confront her right there, to scream at her, to demand an explanation. But something held him back. The confrontation would only end in chaos. No, he needed to make sure he had all the evidence before he did anything. His heart ached, and his mind screamed for him to act. But deep down, Richard knew the only way forward was to gather the truth, to face her with undeniable proof of her betrayal. For the next few days, Richard did everything he could to gather concrete evidence, quietly building his case. He saved every message between Anna and Jake, making sure he had screenshots of the intimate exchanges that would leave Anna no room for denial. He found receipts from expensive dinners, hotel bookings with dates that lined up with Anna's late-night absences. The weight of the evidence grew heavier with each discovery. Richard began to feel like a detective, analyzing every detail, looking for more signs that Anna had been living a double life. All the while, he kept up the facade of the loving husband, pretending nothing was wrong, hiding his pain behind a mask of normalcy. He knew it wouldn't be long before he confronted her, but he wanted everything laid out clearly, evidence that she couldn't argue against. The suspense built as each new piece fell into place. Richard was determined to have his answers, and when the time came, he wouldn't back down. Anna would have to face the truth. As Richard continued his search for more evidence, he stumbled upon something even more shocking. Jake was married. His heart raced as he pieced together the puzzle. Jake had a wife, Clara, and the thought hit Richard like a ton of bricks. Not only had Anna betrayed him, but Jake had betrayed his own wife as well. This made things even more complicated. Richard couldn't help but wonder, what did Clara know? Was she in the dark, just like him? He couldn't shake the thought of reaching out to her, of finding out the truth from her perspective. After a few days of weighing the decision, Richard sent a message to Clara through social media, explaining what he had uncovered. To his surprise, Clara responded quickly. They agreed to meet at a small cafe outside of town. Richard's pulse quickened as the suspense grew. The meeting could change everything. Neither Richard nor Clara knew the full extent of what the other had gone through, but both were about to come face to face with a painful reality. Would they find solace in each other's pain, or would the meeting only make everything worse? Richard and Clara met in secret, nervously exchanging their findings. They knew that the confrontation needed to be calculated, something that would leave no room for their spouses to escape the truth. After hours of discussion, they decided on the perfect strategy. They would confront Anna and Jake in a public setting. It would be impossible for either of them to deny the evidence or talk their way out of the situation when they were surrounded by strangers. The tension between Richard and Clara was palpable as they prepared for the most painful moment of their lives. Richard's mind raced. He couldn't believe he had come this far, yet part of him felt strangely calm, knowing this was the moment he'd been dreading but also craving. He wasn't just seeking answers anymore. This was about taking back control of his life, reclaiming his dignity. The calm before the storm felt like an eternity. The day of the confrontation arrived. Richard and Clara met at a quiet restaurant, the location chosen for its intimacy and privacy. They had agreed to invite Anna and Jake under the guise of a casual dinner. When Anna and Jake arrived, they were greeted by the calm faces of Richard and Clara, which immediately set off alarm bells. As they sat down, The tension was suffocating. Without wasting any time, Richard pulled out his phone and started showing Anna and Jake the undeniable proof. Screenshots of the messages, receipts, hotel bookings. Each piece of evidence was like a hammer striking the lies they had been living. Anna's face drained of color, her lips quivered, and Jake's eyes darted around, unsure of how to react. Initially, they both tried to deny everything, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but the more they spoke, the more their excuses crumbled. Anna's voice broke as she pleaded with Richard, trying to explain her actions, but Richard was unmoved. There was no guilt in his heart, only cold satisfaction. The truth was finally exposed, and there was no going back. This was the moment of reckoning. Richard felt a rush of adrenaline. The betrayal had been exposed, and he had won. After the confrontation, Richard and Clara stood up and walked away, leaving Anna and Jake sitting at the table, their faces pale, the weight of their lies sinking in. The air between them was heavy with the residue of broken trust. Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of cold satisfaction as he left the restaurant. The burden of carrying the secret of Anna's betrayal had finally been lifted. He had been living in a fog of suspicion and pain for so long, but now the truth was out in the open. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. The emotional toll of the confrontation was undeniable. It had hurt, but it had also given him a sense of closure he didn't realize he needed. It was no longer his pain to bear. The next chapter of his life was about to begin, and he was taking control of it, one painful step at a time. With the truth out, Richard began the painful yet necessary process of divorcing Anna. The emotional toll was heavy, but there was a strange sense of liberation in letting go of the past. For the first time in years, he focused on himself, rediscovering old hobbies he had set aside, reconnecting with friends he had drifted away from, and finding comfort in the small moments of joy that had once been overshadowed by the betrayal. Each day felt like a small victory as he rebuilt his life, piece by piece. He started to gain perspective, realizing that even though the betrayal had scarred him deeply, it had also made him stronger. Richard understood now that love without loyalty is nothing but an illusion. He was no longer the man he had been before. His heart had been broken, but it had also been mended in ways he never expected. He had become someone new, someone wiser, someone free. Richard reflected on the painful lesson he had learned through this ordeal. Love without loyalty is empty, a facade built on fragile trust. He was no longer the same person who had once blindly trusted in his wife. The betrayal had shattered him, but it had also forged a new version of him, stronger, wiser, and free. As he moved forward, Richard knew that sometimes betrayal isn't just a painful wound. It's the catalyst for transformation, for self-discovery. He had been broken, but now he was whole again. And this time, he was the one in control of his own future.